And then, of course, giving effective feedback, it's part of confronting performance. It's part of building on strengths. But I think that there's also an element there, and you'll see in this little description, that 3 pieces, I think, of good feedback that we constantly are trying to look for ways to work toward and balance. What should we keep doing, stop doing, start doing? Now you notice that's your action journal is built around that idea. But what should we keep doing, stop doing, start doing is, I think, elements of effective feedback. Other elements of effective feedback are focusing, and it's similar to confronting performance, focusing on the situation, issue, or behavior, not on the person. So being able to disconnect or disassociate the performance from the performer, so that we're commenting on the performance and focusing on the performance, not on the performer as a bad person or a problem or something like that. And of course, good coaches tend to do a lot of listening. There's that basic principle. Covey popularized it as one of his 7 habits. Seek first to understand before you try to be understood. That's a very powerful communication principle. So before I start trying to influence and persuade and give my side of the story, let me really understand where they're coming from. Why are they looking at things in that way? Again, in this video, you're going to see some good examples of questions, and one of the basic steps is really making sure that we ask and listen and probe before we jump in with our perspective. Of course, good coaches are very good cheerleaders. They're good at appreciation, recognition, celebration. And they tend to, again, build on strengths, try to figure out how to draw out more of that. Poor coaches, poor managers, and I once worked for one of these years ago, he was proud of the fact that he used MBE, management by exception. He said, Jim, if there's a problem, you're going to hear from me right away. But if you don't hear from me, assume everything's going well and you're doing a great job. That was his philosophy. He believed in that philosophy. You never got a word of recognition or anything like that from him, because basically his philosophy was your recognition is you get to keep your job. Okay? That's essentially what his philosophy was. And of course, over time, you start to feel like just another asset. You start to feel like furniture. You start to feel taken for granted. I actually got in a conversation with him a couple of years later when I got to know him a little better and we got a little closer to each other. And he was telling me about his failed first marriage and how much it drove him crazy that his wife always needed her to tell her that he loved her. That's the way he put it. He said, I married her, didn't I? But that's where he was coming from. That was the mindset. That why do I need to keep reinforcing and all this kind of thing? Because, hey, my actions are, well, I haven't divorced you yet, so I must love you. Right? That's essentially the mindset. So you haven't been fired, so I haven't dealt with a problem, so assume you're doing a good job. And then, of course, good coaches find multitudes of ways to humanize and personalize. Whether it's, for example, sending a little personal handwritten note, maybe even to the person's home. Or whether it's keeping a little cheat book of all the spouses' names, children's names, special birthdays, anniversaries, coffee preferences of everybody on your team. So that when you swing by Tim Hortons to pick up something for your team, or when you run across that individual again 3 weeks later, if you're apart from them, or just you can talk to them about maybe personal interests or about what's going on in their life generally, or you can just somehow personalize. Or on the topic of recognition, some individuals absolutely thrive on public recognition. They love to be in the spotlight. Others are horrified by that kind of recognition, and it's actually a form of punishment. And if you were to especially get them to stand up and talk about what they did or in some way, they'd be absolutely horrified by that. Well, we've got to make sure that we know the individual and that we're tailoring accordingly to how they like to be recognized or how they like to be dealt with. And then lastly is making sure that we are doing lots of reviewing and reflecting and looking at what's working, what isn't working. Drucker was big on this one. He was a kind of a radical on this. He believed, and I remember reading back in The Effective Executive, a book he wrote in 1964 when I started early in my management career, and I found it a really useful little book. And I tried to follow this. It was hard to do. But quarterly performance discussions with everybody on your team. And that dramatically changes how you manage. It changes the focus of what you do. Many managers have a tough time just filling out the performance appraisal once a year and getting it to HR on time. And that turns into one of those fill out the boxes kinds of bureaucratic exercises that really doesn't have a lot of meaning to it. So what Drucker is arguing, and what he has said for years, and again guys like Jack Welch and others, Drucker has said management's main responsibility is developing people. That is management's primary and main responsibility, developing people. And having conversations, such as on a quarterly basis about, so how are things going, what's working, what isn't working, all of this stuff, doing that on a regular basis is very key to getting out of management mode and more into leadership mode and into developing, growing, and coaching people within the team and the organization. So take a minute, rank order yourself there, and we won't ask you to share your rankings, but I'm going to do a quick poll as to who feels the greatest strengths and greatest weaknesses, just to get a bit of a feeling for around the room.